So you want to play a tank in an MMO. Very good choice. You're obviously someone of intelligence and vision, because you've had the wisdom to realise that if you're going to waste your life in the most addictive kind of video game, you may as well go all the way. That's right, tanking isn't for everyone. You can't just pick daisies all day whilst watching reruns of Grey's Anatomy like a healer, or stand in the centre of a nuclear explosion like a damage dealer, ticking your balls and laughing your ass off as you die because at least you're topping the DPS meters. No, being a tank requires something more. Which begs the question, what makes you think that you have what it takes to play a tank in an MMO game? I'll save you the trouble. You don't have what it takes yet, and what you really need is the experienced advice of a skilled tanking veteran who can guide you on your path. But they're not available right now, so you'll have to make do with me. I promise this will absolutely be a serious take on tanking, and it should absolutely be taken seriously. So without further ado, let me tell you everything, just about, that you need to know if you want to become a tank in an MMO game. Now, to understand what it means to tank, you need to first be introduced to the Holy Trinity. And don't worry, I'm not about to start preaching to you like Pastor Dr. Martin Semper.
And then they eat the poo-poo.
What we are talking about here is the trinity of DPS, healer, and yes, of course, tank. The rules are simple. Enemies hit hard. Too hard for your weakling mages and rogues to survive for long. Their job as DPSers is to cause as much carnage as possible while taking absolutely no responsibility, and believe me, these people can't be trusted with anything other than hitting stuff as hard as possible. I mean it, seriously, the wheel may still appear to be turning, but the hamster died a long time ago. Meanwhile, you, as the tank, have many responsibilities, but they all pretty much boil down to one simple thing. You are tough enough to take those hits from the enemy and stay standing, so that's your job. You tank the damage, because you're hard, like a tank. Fucking moron, to put it simply, have you ever seen those slap competitions on YouTube? You're basically one of those dudes. Now the final part of the Holy Trinity is the healer, but that role is pretty much self-explanatory, and at the end of the day, you're here because you want to become some Giga Chad tank. If you wanted to be a healer, you'd be looking up a video on how to get kicked in the bollocks 1,000 times a day without complaining about it. So now that you know what the tank role actually is, let's take a minute to talk about race. Because in the MMO world, believing in racial equality could get you kicked, so throw that shit out the window. You gotta focus on what matters, right? Obviously, every game is different when it comes to which races will be available for you to choose from when making your character. Some games keep it pretty traditional and simple. In WoW, for example, you could pick a beefy Tauren or an Orc if you want to be a true Chad tank. Or you could pick any alliance race if you're bad at the game. In Final Fantasy XIV, you could choose between various races with complicated names that I don't know how to pronounce, but that doesn't matter because there really is only one choice in that game. Generally, as a rule of thumb, you want to pick the biggest, toughest race available to you, either to convey actual racial benefits if it's a more old school MMO, or simply to suggest that you know what the fuck you're doing. As I just mentioned, in some MMOs you will get racial abilities or passive advantages depending on the role you want to pick, and usually for tanks this lines up with the bulkier, less intellectual races. With a good example of this being in the original EverQuest, which allowed you to play as a Scottish person, which came with the significant advantage of being immune to frontal stuns, a natural consequence of existing on a diet of buckfast and ketamine. Next thing to choose is your class, but again, this will differ depending on what you're playing, and it really doesn't matter. Pick what you like. Typically I would suggest going with the guy who most closely resembles Havel the Rock, but that's just common sense, and again, every game offers different interesting options, so you can be everything from a knight to a bear, to a dude dressed in a trench coat with a gun attached to a sword. Damn, that's actually fucking sick. Moving on then, you've chosen your race and class and it's time to start leveling. Now, I'm not going to teach you how to suck eggs. Whatever game you're playing, the solo experience whilst leveling is going to be easy and predictable, and much the same across every game you're playing, with you running around different zones, exterminating the native wildlife like fucking Elmer Fudd. You're not interested in any of that shit though. You're a tank after all. Your interest is in group content where you can show off and your EPing can grow harder than a fucking metapod. This is the environment in which your rare ability to get punched in the face multiple times without turning into a cabbage is highly sought after. Every group that you run content with, and every dungeon is going to be different depending on what game you're playing, or what class you're playing, or who you're playing with. This video isn't about mechanics and it isn't focused on one specific game. You need to be prepared for the fact that communities are different too. In Final Fantasy XIV, you're likely to be warmly embraced by other players when running dungeons, whereas in WoW you can expect to be viciously beaten, racially abused, and generally treated like one of the drummers in Whiplash, and that's if you actually do a good job. But listen, none of that matters. You don't need to know the mechanics of the dungeon, raid, or world boss that you're fighting, and it doesn't matter which game you're playing. Instead, just remember this simple, universal principle of tanking, a little known secret that I have grown to understand over years of honing my craft in normal mode high mode. You listening? Tanking isn't about knowing what you're doing, okay? It's about not knowing what you're doing, but acting confident when you do it. This is something all successful tanks learn at some point on their journey. You can have absolutely no fucking idea what's going on, but if you shout enough and establish dominance early on, you'll be fine. What you really need to master is the art of the blame game, because frankly, you could be the best tank in the world, but sometimes things go wrong. People die, wipes happen. Again, it's not about preventing that from happening, it's about knowing how to shift the blame off yourself if it does. I like to follow a simple process when it comes to wipes. If the DPS dies and that causes the wipe, blame the healer. If mechanics wipe the group, blame the DPS. And if you die first, blame the healer. If everyone dies and you're left standing, deliberately use defensive cooldowns to stave off your own death so that you look harder. I promise you this is absolutely not a dick move, and remember, blame the healer. Finally, if you cock up a tank mechanic which wipes the group, and there is absolutely no realistic way of passing blame onto the DPS or even the healer, then always remember your trump card. You can always blame the secret extra member of the group. Lag. That always works. What matters here is that as a tank, you should absolutely not, under any circumstances, accept blame for any failure. Owning your mistakes is a sign of weakness, and let's be honest, if you were interested in that, you'd be playing a healer. I think the strongest message I would send to you as a fledgling tank is this. You need to essentially act like a modern politician. Take credit for wins which weren't yours, explain away mistakes as either completely meaningless or the fault of others, and at no time allow yourself to be blamed for anything. But when I say that you're like a modern politician, don't get it twisted. In the government of the raid team, you aren't something shitty like the Minister for Education or Health or any of that pointless crap. You are the tank. You are El Presidente, the undisputed dictator of your group, and as El Presidente, you are the one who holds the codes to the nukes. And at the end of the day, if a few innocent lives are lost when you choose to hit the launch button, well, who cares? You're the only one in the room who wasn't expendable to begin with. Hello everyone, and thank you very much for watching this video. If you got a laugh out of it, I'd love to see you stick around by subscribing to the channel. This format of videos is one I want to do a lot more of on various topics from MMO games, and it is a ton of fun, so the more people here, the merrier. In the meantime, I'll wish you all a very good day, and I will see you in the next video, guys. Bye bye.